The Gog and Magog War is one of the most intriguing and mysterious prophecies in the Bible, mentioned both in the Old Testament and the New Testament. This apocalyptic battle has sparked the imaginations of theologians, historians, and believers for centuries. The prophecy speaks of a time in the future when a great coalition of nations, led by a figure named Gog, will rise up against Israel in a final catastrophic war. This conflict is shrouded in mystery, with much speculation about who Gog and Magog are, which nations they represent, and when this great battle will take place. At the heart of the prophecy is the figure of Gog, the leader of Magog, and the nations allied with him. In the biblical accounts, Gog's forces are described as a vast and powerful army that will invade Israel in the latter years, when the nation of Israel is living in peace and security. But what makes this war particularly compelling is not just the devastation it promises, but the divine intervention that is foretold. The Bible assures us that despite the overwhelming odds against Israel, God will step in to protect his people and destroy Gog and his army, leading to a dramatic display of divine power and justice. This war is not just a historical event. It holds deep spiritual and prophetic significance. The Gog and Magog prophecy is a critical part of the broader biblical narrative concerning the ultimate victory of God over the forces of evil, the fulfillment of God's promises to Israel, and the establishment of his eternal kingdom. From the book of Ezekiel to the book of Revelation, the mention of Gog and Magog draws us into the heart of God's plan for the end of times, when all things will be made right and every enemy will be defeated. In this exploration, we will delve into the biblical origins of the Gog and Magog prophecy, examining the nations involved, the reasons behind the conflict, and the ultimate outcome as foretold in Scripture. By the end of this journey, we will have a deeper understanding of who Gog and Magog represent, what the war signifies in biblical prophecy, and how it connects to the ultimate victory of God over evil. The prophecies of Gog and Magog in Ezekiel. The primary and most detailed prophecy regarding Gog and Magog is found in the book of Ezekiel, specifically in chapters 38 and 39. These chapters provide a vivid and powerful depiction of a future invasion of Israel by a leader named Gog, who will come from the land of Magog. The prophecy is set during a time when Israel is experiencing peace and security, making the invasion all the more shocking. But what does Ezekiel tell us about Gog, Magog, and the eventual battle? Ezekiel 38:1-2 opens with God speaking directly to the prophet Ezekiel, instructing him to set his face against Gog and prophesy against him. And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. Gog is described as the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, regions that were historically located in the area north of Israel, often associated with peoples in what is now modern-day Russia, Turkey, and surrounding areas. In biblical times, these names were commonly linked to regions inhabited by tribes to the far north of Israel. The identity of Gog, however, is shrouded in mystery. While many scholars have speculated that Gog refers to a specific historical or future leader, others suggest that Gog may represent a symbolic or spiritual force leading an army of nations against God's people. The name Magog is even more ambiguous. Traditionally, it has been interpreted as referring to a land north of Israel, possibly what we would now call Russia, although interpretations vary. The exact identity of Magog and its ruler, Gog, remains a subject of great debate, but the Bible makes it clear that they are leaders of a large hostile army destined to come against Israel. As Ezekiel 38:3-4 continues, the prophecy becomes more specific, and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and I will turn thee back and leave but the sixth part of thee, and will cause thee to come up from the north parts, and will bring thee upon the mountains of Israel. Here, God declares his opposition to Gog, emphasizing that he will personally intervene in this coming battle. The prophecy details how Gog's forces will be defeated, with God causing them to retreat, and leaving only a small portion of them remaining. This speaks not only to the military might of the invading forces, but also to the divine sovereignty that will determine the outcome of this war. In this passage, we see that the battle is not just a physical confrontation, but a spiritual showdown, where God's power will triumph over the nations who seek to destroy Israel. The prophecy in Ezekiel 38 presents the invasion of Israel as a coordinated effort by multiple nations. These nations listed in Ezekiel 38:5-6 include Persia, modern-day Iran, Cush, Ethiopia, Put, Libya, Gomer, and Togarmah. Each of these nations, while geographically spread out, are presented as coming together under Gog's leadership, forming a massive alliance that will march against Israel. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters, and all his bands and many people with thee. Ezekiel 38:5-6. The inclusion of Persia, Iran is particularly significant given the modern geopolitical context. As of today, Iran is one of the most prominent nations in the Middle East with a known hostile stance toward Israel. The mention of Persia in this prophecy has led many to associate the events described with current tensions in the Middle East, where nations like Iran, Syria, and others have been involved in anti-Israel rhetoric and military actions. One of the key elements of this prophecy is the timing. The invasion is foretold to occur at a time when Israel is dwelling in peace, a time when the nation has been regathered and is experiencing a period of prosperity and security. Ezekiel 38:8 states, "After many days thou shalt be visited. In the latter years thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword, and is gathered out of many people, against the mountains of Israel, which have been always waste. But it is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely all of them." This verse points to the regathering of Israel in the latter years, a time after Israel has been scattered among the nations and then brought back to its land. The latter years are often understood as the time of Israel's modern return to the land, beginning with the founding of the State of Israel in 1948. The prophecy indicates that Israel will be living in peace and safety, only to be attacked by a coalition of nations, setting the stage for divine intervention. The invasion described in Ezekiel 38 is not only a political and military event, but a spiritual one. This war represents the culmination of the nation's hatred and enmity against Israel. It is portrayed as the final attempt by Gog and his coalition to destroy God's chosen people. However, as the prophecy unfolds, it becomes clear that this battle will not end in defeat for Israel. Instead, it is a clear demonstration of God's power to protect his people. Ezekiel 39:2 provides further insight into the outcome, "And I will turn thee back, and leave but the sixth part of thee, and will cause thee to come up from the north parts, and will bring thee upon the mountains of Israel." This verse highlights the dramatic nature of God's intervention. Despite the overwhelming forces that Gog will lead, only a fraction of his army will survive. The remainder will be utterly destroyed by God's power, showing that no matter how strong the enemy might appear, God will always protect Israel. In summary, Ezekiel's prophecy outlines a fierce and terrifying war where Gog, the leader of a vast coalition of nations, will march against Israel. This battle, however, will not end in Israel's destruction, but in God's glorious intervention. Israel will emerge victorious, and God's name will be glorified through this miraculous deliverance. This battle serves as a testament to God's sovereignty and his eternal covenant with his people, Israel. The nations involved, who are Gog and Magog. As we dive deeper into the prophecy of Gog and Magog, one of the most compelling questions arises. Who exactly are Gog and Magog, and which nations are involved in this final climactic battle against Israel? Ezekiel's prophecy in chapters 38 and 39 provides some clues, but the identities of these figures and the lands they represent have been the subject of much speculation and debate throughout history. Understanding who Gog is, where Magog is located, and how the nations mentioned in the prophecy fit into the modern geopolitical landscape is crucial to unraveling the mystery of this ancient biblical prediction. Gog, the leader of the invasion Gog, is described in the prophecy as the chief prince of Magog, Meshech, and Tubal, Ezekiel 38:2. This title suggests that Gog is a powerful and influential leader, perhaps even a king who rules over these regions. While the Bible does not provide a full description of Gog's identity, it is clear that he is a figure of great authority, leading a coalition of nations in their attempt to destroy Israel. Gog is not necessarily a personal name, but could be a title, much like Pharaoh or Caesar, used to denote a ruler or leader of a specific region. Some scholars have speculated that Gog represents a future leader or a political figure who will arise in the last days to lead the forces of evil against God's people. Others have seen Gog as a symbolic figure, representing the culmination of all evil forces that have opposed Israel throughout history. The fact that Gog is described as being from the north has led many to connect him with nations located to the north of Israel. In historical interpretations, Gog was often linked to ancient peoples in regions north of Israel, such as the Scythians or the Thracians, who lived in areas around the Caucasus and beyond the Black Sea. In more recent interpretations, however, many believe that Gog represents Russia, given its geographic location to the north of Israel and its increasing role in Middle Eastern politics. Russia's alliances and interventions in Syria and its growing hostility towards Israel and the West have led some to speculate that Gog, in a future sense, could be a Russian leader. Magog, the land of Gog Magog. The land associated with Gog is another key element of this prophecy. In ancient times, Magog was often seen as a region or nation to the far north of Israel. The name Magog is thought to be a reference to a people or tribe that lived in the area beyond the Caspian Sea and the Caucasus Mountains. These regions were home to various ancient nomadic tribes that interacted with Israel during the Old Testament period. In many historical contexts, Magog was identified with peoples who lived in the areas of modern-day Russia, southern Turkey, and even parts of Central Asia. However, due to the ambiguous nature of ancient geographical references, the exact location of Magog has remained speculative. In modern biblical interpretations, many scholars view Magog as representing a broader region, encompassing the nations of the far north. Some interpretations suggest that Magog could refer to a confederation of nations, particularly those in the northern parts of the world, that will join forces under the leadership of Gog. As Ezekiel's prophecy unfolds, the leader Gog will rally nations like Persia, Cush, and Libya to join him in this final attack on Israel. The nations of Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya. In Ezekiel 38:5-6, Ezekiel lists several nations that will align themselves with Gog in this great invasion. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet, Gomer, and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee. Ezekiel 38:5-6, Persia. This refers to the ancient empire of Persia, which corresponds to modern-day Iran. Iran has been a significant player in the Middle East in recent years, particularly with its growing influence in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, where it has supported anti-Israel militias and organizations like Hezbollah. The involvement of Persia in the Ezekiel prophecy is striking, as Iran's leadership has frequently voiced its hostility towards Israel, calling for the destruction of the Jewish state. Many modern scholars point to this as a clear connection to the prophetic role Persia, Iran plays in the Gog and Magog War. Ethiopia. In Ezekiel's time, Ethiopia referred to the kingdom located south of Egypt, in what we now know as Sudan and parts of eastern Africa. In the context of the Gog and Magog prophecy, Ethiopia is likely used symbolically to represent a nation that will align itself with Gog in this final battle. Today, some interpretations suggest that this could point to nations in northern Africa, possibly including Sudan or other regions of Africa, which may come together under the banner of Gog's alliance. Libya, in biblical times referred to the region to the west of Egypt, generally associated with modern-day Libya. This part of North Africa has historically had a complicated relationship with Israel. In Ezekiel's prophecy, Libya's inclusion with Gog's coalition emphasizes the wide range of nations that will unite in opposition to Israel during the final war. In modern times, Libya has been a troubled nation, but it still holds strategic importance in the geopolitics of the Mediterranean region. Gomer and Togarmah, additional allies in the north. In Ezekiel 38:6, we find references to Gomer and Togarmah, who will also join forces with Gog in this great battle. These two nations are often associated with ancient peoples from the far north. Gomer was the name of a son of Japheth in the Bible, and it is believed that his descendants settled in the regions of what is now Turkey, particularly in the areas around the Black Sea. In Ezekiel's prophecy, Gomer may represent modern-day Turkey, a nation that has increasingly aligned itself with Russia in recent years. This geopolitical shift has led many scholars to consider Turkey's potential role in the Gog and Magog War. Togarmah was another descendant of Japheth, often associated with peoples in regions that are now parts of Armenia, Georgia, and eastern Turkey. Like Gomer, Togarmah's descendants are believed to have settled in the northern parts of the world. In Ezekiel's prophecy, Togarmah represents one of the many northern nations that will join Gog's invasion of Israel, underscoring the scale and scope of the alliance against God's people. The timing and the end of days. The timing of the Gog and Magog War is another critical aspect of the prophecy. Ezekiel makes it clear that this conflict will take place in the latter years, when Israel is restored and dwelling securely. This timing suggests that the war will occur after Israel has been re-established as a nation, which in modern times is often interpreted as a reference to the re-establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. In Ezekiel 38:8, it is written, "After many days thou shalt be visited, in the latter years thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword, and is gathered out of many people, against the mountains of Israel, which have been always waste, but it is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely all of them." The latter years likely refer to the period leading up to the end times, when Israel will be at peace and the nations will rise up against it. This period of peace will be short-lived, as the nations, led by Gog and Magog, will come together in a final attempt to destroy Israel. However, as we have seen in the prophecies, despite the overwhelming odds, Israel will not be defeated. God's intervention will ensure their victory. The nations involved in the Gog and Magog War, led by Gog from the land of Magog, represent a coalition of countries that span across the northern regions of the world, particularly those with historical or modern ties to Russia, Iran, Turkey, and parts of Africa. Each of these nations plays a role in the final conflict against Israel, a battle that is ultimately destined to fail due to God's intervention. The inclusion of Persia, Iran, Ethiopia, Libya, Gomer, and Togarmah points to a diverse group of nations that will be drawn into this cataclysmic war, uniting in opposition to Israel. However, the prophecy assures us that despite the overwhelming forces of Gog, Israel will emerge victorious through the miraculous power of God. The purpose of the war. What is Gog's motivation? To fully grasp the significance of the Gog and Magog War, it's essential to understand the underlying motivations behind the conflict. The prophecy in Ezekiel 38 paints a picture of a powerful coalition of nations led by Gog, converging on Israel. But what is the driving force behind this massive invasion? Why do these nations under Gog's leadership seek to destroy Israel? And what are their ultimate goals? Greed and desire for spoils. One of the primary motivations behind the war, as indicated in Ezekiel 38:10-12, is the desire for material gain and the plundering of Israel's wealth. Ezekiel writes, "Thus saith the Lord God, it shall also come to pass, that at the same time shall things come into thy mind, and thou shalt think an evil thought, and thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, and having neither bars nor gates, to take a spoil, and to take a prey, to turn thine hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited, and upon the people that are gathered out of the nations, which have gotten cattle and goods, that dwell in the midst of the land. Ezekiel 38:10-12. Gog's motivation, as outlined in these verses, is greed. He sees Israel as a prosperous land, a nation that has been restored and is now at peace. The prophecy describes Israel as a place where the people are living without walls, having neither bars nor gates, a description that speaks to the sense of security Israel will experience at this time. This period of peace will make Israel vulnerable to attack, and Gog will seek to exploit this opportunity to plunder and seize the wealth that Israel has accumulated. The land of Israel, particularly in modern times, is seen as rich in resources and strategically located at the crossroads of the Middle East. Historically, the region has been a point of contention due to its agricultural productivity, mineral resources, and strategic importance. Gog and his coalition view Israel's prosperity as something to be taken, and they see the invasion as an opportunity to gain wealth, land, and power. Hatred and spiritual conflict beyond material greed. There is also a deeply rooted spiritual conflict at play in the Gog and Magog War. Israel, as God's chosen people, has long been a target for the forces of evil, and Gog, as the leader of this coalition, symbolizes the culmination of this opposition. The nations that follow Gog into battle against Israel are not just motivated by earthly desires, but are also aligned with a spiritual battle between good and evil. The history of Israel is marked by spiritual warfare, with various nations and rulers attempting to destroy or subjugate the Jewish people. From ancient Egypt to the Babylonian Empire, Israel's enemies have always been depicted as enemies of God's covenant. The Gog and Magog War, in this sense, is the ultimate manifestation of this ongoing spiritual struggle. Ezekiel 38:14-16 reveals that Gog's invasion will be driven by a desire to oppose God's plan for Israel. Therefore, Son of man, prophesy, and say unto Gog, Thus saith the Lord God, In that day when my people of Israel dwellest safely, shalt thou not know it, and thou shalt come from thy place out of the north parts, thou and many people with thee, all of them riding upon horses, a great company, and a mighty army. And thou shalt come up against my people of Israel, as a cloud to cover the land. It shall be in the latter days, and I will bring thee against my land, that the heathen may know me, when I shall be sanctified in thee, O Gog, before their eyes. Ezekiel 38:14-16. The spiritual dimension of this war is evident in the idea that Gog and his forces are being drawn to Israel, not just for earthly gains but to oppose God's plan for his people. God uses this invasion as an opportunity to demonstrate his power and holiness before the nations. The war will serve as a public display of God's judgment and his ultimate victory over the forces of evil. This speaks to a deeper spiritual motivation in Gog's heart, a desire to thwart God's purposes and destroy the nation that bears his name. The gathering of the nations against Israel. Another critical aspect of the motivation for this war is the gathering of many nations to form an alliance against Israel. Ezekiel 38:9-10 indicates that Gog's invasion will not be a solitary action, but a coordinated effort involving several nations. Thou shalt ascend and come like a storm. Thou shalt be like a cloud to cover the land, thou and all thy bands, and many people with thee. Thus saith the Lord God, It shall also come to pass, that at the same time shall things come into thy mind, and thou shalt think an evil thought. Ezekiel 38:9-10. The gathering of nations under Gog's leadership reflects a united effort to bring Israel to its knees. While the individual motivations of the nations involved may vary, the underlying commonality is their opposition to Israel and their desire to destroy it. This coalition represents the culmination of the nation's historical hostility toward Israel, but it is also symbolic of the larger global forces that oppose God's people. The cloud that covers the land in Ezekiel's prophecy reflects the overwhelming nature of this attack. Israel, in this moment, will seem powerless against the vast forces arrayed against it. The sense of helplessness and isolation felt by Israel in the face of this overwhelming assault will only make God's eventual intervention and victory all the more remarkable. A divine testimony, God's purpose in the conflict. While the motivations of Gog and his coalition are rooted in greed and hatred, God's purpose for allowing this war is far greater. The war will serve as a dramatic stage for God to display his glory and power before the nations. Ezekiel 39:7 emphasizes that God's name will be glorified through the defeat of Gog. So will I make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel, and I will not let them pollute my holy name any more. And the heathen shall know that I am the Lord, the Holy One in Israel. Ezekiel 39:7. The ultimate purpose of the Gog and Magog war is not the destruction of Israel, but rather the magnification of God's name and the demonstration of his sovereignty over all nations. By intervening in such a powerful way, God will prove that he is the protector of his people and the true king of the world. The defeat of Gog will send a message to the nations that God's power is supreme and his promises to Israel are unbreakable. The motivations behind the Gog and Magog war are both material and spiritual. Gog, as the leader of this vast coalition, is driven by a desire for wealth and resources, but the war is also deeply spiritual, representing the final attempt by the forces of evil to destroy Israel and thwart God's plan. However, God will intervene in a dramatic display of power, ensuring that Israel is protected and that his name is glorified. The ultimate outcome of the war will not be the defeat of Israel, but the vindication of God's sovereignty and the fulfillment of his promises to his people. The end of the Gog and Magog war and the eternal victory of God. The Gog and Magog war, as foretold in the prophecies of Ezekiel and Revelation, is not just an event to be studied in the context of the end times, but is a key moment in God's grand narrative of redemption and restoration. This battle, marked by the alliance of nations against Israel, may appear to be the final act of spiritual warfare, but in reality, it is the moment when the forces of evil are utterly defeated, and God's eternal victory is firmly established. The war is not a defeat for Israel, but a profound demonstration of God's faithfulness, power, and unshakable sovereignty. The ultimate victory of God. At the heart of the Gog and Magog prophecy is the undeniable truth that no matter how overwhelming the odds, God's victory is assured. Gog, as the leader of a vast coalition of nations, may seem to have the upper hand. His forces are powerful, and his intentions are clear: destroy Israel, plunder the land, and defeat God's people. However, the moment Gog's armies march against Israel, God himself intervenes, bringing about their utter destruction. The intervention of God in the Gog and Magog war is a display of his unmatched power and authority. As seen in Ezekiel 38:22, God uses supernatural means to bring judgment upon Gog's forces: pestilence, bloodshed, rain, hail, fire, and brimstone. The overwhelming nature of God's judgment leaves no room for doubt. God does not simply watch from a distance. He actively engages in the battle, ensuring that Gog's army is utterly defeated. This victory emphasizes that God is not a passive observer in the world's affairs, but an active participant in protecting his people and executing his justice. The outcome of the war is a clear reminder that no army, no matter how mighty, can stand against the power of God. His victory over Gog and Magog marks the final defeat of the forces of evil. Once this battle is fought, evil will have no place left to reign, and God's kingdom will be established without opposition. Israel's restoration and God's glory. The end of the Gog and Magog war also signals the full restoration of Israel. Throughout history, Israel has faced oppression, exile, and attacks from many nations. Yet, despite all the trials and struggles, God's promises to Israel remain unbroken. The defeat of Gog and his armies is the fulfillment of God's covenant with Israel, showing that, despite the attempts of the nations to destroy the Jewish state, God will always protect his people. In Ezekiel 39:7, God declares that his name will be made known, and that he will no longer allow his people to defile his holy name. This victory will demonstrate to the world that Israel's God is the true and living God, who is faithful to his promises. It is a powerful testimony to Israel and to the nations that God is present and active in the affairs of the world. The defeat of Gog is a public affirmation of God's holiness, power, and ability to deliver his people from the greatest of dangers. This event also marks the beginning of a new era for Israel. With Gog's forces utterly defeated, Israel will no longer be plagued by external threats or enemies. The restoration of the nation will be complete, and Israel will dwell in peace, under God's protection, and with a renewed sense of security. The unveiling of God's kingdom, the ultimate outcome of the Gog and Magog War, is the establishment of God's eternal reign over the earth. The final defeat of evil prepares the way for the coming of God's kingdom in its fullness. In Revelation 29, the fire that consumes Gog and Magog is a precursor to the final judgment, which is followed by the creation of a new heaven and a new earth. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Revelation 21:1-2. With the destruction of Gog and Magog, and the final defeat of Satan, the forces of evil will have no further influence on the world. God's kingdom will be established, and the redeemed will dwell with him in a perfect world. The final victory in the Gog and Magog War sets the stage for the establishment of God's eternal reign, where there will be no more death, no more sin, and no more suffering. This final victory also signals the end of history as we know it, making way for the eternal age in which God will dwell with his people. The church, the people of God, will be part of this eternal kingdom, living in harmony with God in a new creation, free from the taint of sin and corruption. The completion of God's redemptive plan will be marked by this victory over evil, bringing all things under the authority of Christ. A call for hope and assurance for believers today. The Gog and Magog War provides profound hope and assurance. The message of the war is that no matter the power or the appearance of victory that evil may seem to have, it will always be overcome by God's power. The forces of darkness may rage against the people of God, but they will never triumph. The ultimate victory belongs to God, and he will see his promises to Israel and his people fulfilled. The war also serves as a reminder that the present struggles and challenges believers face are temporary. While we live in a world marred by sin, injustice, and suffering, the victory of God is certain. The day will come when evil will be eradicated, and God's eternal kingdom will be established. In this light, the Gog and Magog War is not only a prophecy about the end of days but also a source of encouragement for Christians, urging them to hold fast to their faith, knowing that God's victory is assured. The final triumph of God's kingdom. The end of the Gog and Magog War marks the final chapter in the cosmic battle between good and evil. It is the moment when God's sovereignty is fully established, and his kingdom is ushered in without opposition. The defeat of Gog and his armies demonstrates God's supreme power, his faithfulness to his people, and the ultimate fulfillment of his promises. As we look forward to that day, believers can take heart, knowing that God will protect his people, and that his victory is inevitable. The Gog and Magog War is not just a historical event, it is a prophecy of the future triumph of God, the restoration of Israel, and the eternal establishment of his reign over all the earth.